great to be here back with you. Great to see Janet again, and thank you for joining me this afternoon. Can you hear me, JJ?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, great. For a brief survey of Hebrew Bible prophecy, Hebrew Bible / Old Testament. Elizabeth Evans has informed me that the Bible group has been reading the prophets and getting through Amos. So this will be exciting because some of the excerpts, actually Amos is our case study because the book of Amos has many of the characteristic features of Hebrew Bible prophecy. So I hope you'll get excited when you see something familiar in Amos. So, what role do the prophets play in ancient Israel, right? Your immediate reaction to the question might be, well, of course they tell the future. But were they prognosticators of future events or social agitators? Were they doomsayers or reformers? As we will find out, they were all of the above. And but the classical prophets were less. They weren't so much diviners or prognosticators of the future in the way that I just met a gentleman. Is it Renato?
Yes.
Yes, who wants to know what will happen to him in 10 years. The prophets of the Hebrew Bible would not be able to address that. They had no interest in the future in that respect. But the future well-being of Israel was what mattered to them. That was what was at stake. So we will today provide a brief introduction to the general characteristics of prophetic literature. We'll explore the ways in which the message of biblical prophets who railed against social injustices comes to find relevance in the 21st century. And really at the end, I very much hope that we will just have a conversation about how we can take the message of the prophets and apply it to our contemporary situation. But if you have to rush out, I'll just tell you right now, key point, the prophets were social critics who spoke to current events and the moral decay of those with wealth and power.
Huh.
That's pretty much it.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing has changed. Wow. No, but isn't that interesting, right? Well, we can talk about human nature and why nothing has changed. It's a great comment. Okay, so I should move to slide 2. By the way, I just put a lot on the slides. They didn't have handouts just to be, I guess, ecologically sensitive. So if it's too much, we'll go through it very slowly. Characteristics of prophetic literature. The prophets were not prognosticators, diviners predicting the future by manipulating objects or consulting oracular objects or checking out the entrails of sacrificial animals. There's some of that, certainly in the former prophetic works, of the historical works. We find that. There's Saul, we have the witch of Endor, we have the Urim and Tumim, but this is not characteristic of the classical literary prophets. They addressed a concrete historical situation in concrete terms. It wasn't just vague. It was immediate and addressed a local situation. revealed God's immediate intentions, but only insofar as God sought to convey his response to present circumstances. So it wasn't God's intentions for the future of the Israelites in general terms, but they revealed God's immediate intentions, inspired the people to faithful observance of the covenant, again, in the present, characterized by a vehement denunciation of the moral decay and social injustice of the time. I mean, it really is amazing when you think, if you just flip through the prophetic works, on almost every other page, every 2 verses, the constant, the tone of indignation and the constant critique against those who abuse their power and wealth. That is just striking how, as you said, how very contemporary the prophets are, right? Railing against social injustice. Rather sobering. They also tried to make sense of Israel's suffering and defeat, right? One of one of their concerns was, why is Israel on the brink of defeat or has been defeated? How do you reconcile that with God's steadfast commitment, covenantal commitments, right? And how do you explain that? Didn't God say that God would always take care of his people? So why have they succumbed to the Assyrians, and how come the Babylonians have destroyed them? Why are they in exile? How do you reconcile that? And the prophets make sense of that. Notion, I don't have it on here, but just a point, parenthetical. You'll often hear the true and the false prophet. The true prophet is actually the prophet who delivers Yahweh's word, even if it is opposed to the view of the king or the majority.
That happens. Sorry.
Oh, no. I thought that was God saying, right on. So the true prophet proclaims the message of doom against the king and the nation. Just an interesting note. Okay, so we will...
Message of doom.
Yes. Now, background to the classical prophecy. Classical literary. So here, what do I mean? You have, certainly in the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish division is the tripartite division: Torah, the prophets, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, the writings. And in that section of the Nevi'im, you have Joshua, Judges, the 2 books of Samuel, and Kings. Right, even so, they're the former prophet prophetic works. They're historical works. The literary works are the ones you've been studying, right? Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and the minor prophets. Sometimes called the classical prophetic works of the Bible, or the literary. And the classical prophetic works begin with Amos and Hosea. We're talking about the 8th century before the Common Era. They were from and prophesying, sharing the message with the northern kingdom. They preached prior or during the Assyrian crisis around 750 BCE, right? The northern kingdom, also known as the kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom is the kingdom of Judah. Just parenthetically, for those of you interested in history, fell in 722. The Assyrian Empire defeated them, and pretty much the tribes of the northern kingdom were scattered. So that period, as I said, begins with Amos and Hosea, 8th century, and ends with Malachi, 5th century BCE. And the four periods are the Assyrian crisis up north, the Babylonian crisis, and after you have with the defeat, the destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE, you have the Judeans scattered, sent out, especially the elite of the Judean society went up to Babylon, and then you have restoration, Shivat Zion, the return to Judea with the Edict of Cyrus. So that's the period that the classical biblical prophets refer to or come from. Just a quick point about diverse materials. You'll note in Amos there's a third person voice, right? Now, how is it that Amos is writing about Amos in the third person? Now, someone who thinks these are exactly the words of Amos will argue, well, sometimes you refer to yourself in the third person, right? But it is, scholars note that the prophetic works were, there were interpolations or edits by their followers. So that's where you would get maybe the third person. Arrangement of the books, you have the major, you started with the major, right, prophets, and the minor are the, minor prophets are the 12 minor prophets. Minor, not in points, what they have to say is pretty major, but minor in terms of relative size. They're just shorter works. Actually, much more satisfying to get through the minor prophets because you can rip through them because they're shorter, right? So yes, themes that that reoccur in the minor prophetic works: denunciation of social injustice, morality in the national history, destruction, exile, consolation, and hope. These are major themes that we find in the minor prophets. And today we'll really focus on the message of social justice, defending the poor and powerless. So the message of prophetic message of social justice, defending the poor. And here Isaiah is not a minor prophet. Isaiah is a larger, but still within the literary classical category. We have a quote from Isaiah. Who would like to read that?
Elizabeth?
Okay.
Yeah, please.
To get it going. Those who enact unjust statutes and write oppressive decrees, depriving the needy of judgment, robbing my people's poor of justice, making widows their plunder and orphans their prey.
Yeah. Okay, and the powerless from Ezekiel. Would you like to read?
You did not strengthen the weak, nor heal the sick, nor bind up the injured, but ruled them harshly and brutally.
While you're at it, go for Zechariah.
Judge with true justice and show kindness and compassion toward each other. Do not oppress the widow or the orphan, the resident alien or the poor.
Look at that, that's just
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
So let's take a moment. What are observations here? What are some immediate observations that you have? What is there anything striking here?
It is still going on.
Yeah.
But isn't he talking to God? Aren't they talking to God? God is the you in that? Who is the you?
Yeah, who is the you? No.
It's the people in power.
The people in
Yes, it's the society, the people. Now, that's a good question. I would want to see that in context. If there's a specific person, if it is to the leader or the community. It's very important. But the general you, I would surmise, is some other human, right?
Some
Who's
other human.
behaving this way. Yeah, we can talk about how it's still going on we'll discuss that later. But what's the it? What is striking about or what images do we have? I mean, very basic, right? Who's the reference to the poor? Notice widows, right?
Women had no power.
Orphans. I'm sorry?
Women didn't have enough power. If you were a widow, you were
Oh, definitely.
flat on your back. You didn't
That's
have-
right. The neediest of society. I mean, an orphan has no protection, right? The widow has no protection here, right? The poor
the resident aliens.
and the resident alien, right? Good, okay, yeah.
May I ask a question?
Please.
What is the time span among that? Because we have about 300 years worth of time from beginning to end. But where does Isaiah fall?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Isaiah is also earlier. Isaiah is also 8th century, about 8th, maybe 7th century, but not later. Isaiah is one of the earlier prophets. Absolutely. Ezekiel is later, actually. Ezekiel is later. Yeah, thank you. But they're within that time span. Yeah, and you'll see in Ezekiel more of reference to the restoration than you'll find in the earlier. Because Amos is really, as we'll see in a moment, interested in the behavior that will lead to destruction. Yeah. Yes, please.
But regardless of time period, the categories of the widow, the orphan, the resident alien, and the poor, along with the sick, always keep coming up again and again and again.
Yes, and wait till the end. We will find it coming up somewhere else. Yes, they do. Yes. I mean, I love the historical question that was asked, because that's a really important, good question. It's important. And yes, Elizabeth, there's also to keep in mind the transhistorical import and the recurrence of the themes. Good. Okay, they railed against injustices inflicted on laborers. Who's going to read from Jeremiah? If you don't raise your hand, I will pick on. Yes, please.
So woe to him who builds his house on wrongdoing, his roof chambers on injustice, who works his neighbors without pay and gives them no wages. Jeremiah.
Yeah, thank you. Really important, right? Of not giving laborers their due. This you'll see throughout the classical prophets. And then regarding the fast that God wished, the fast that God wished consisted in releasing those bound unjustly, untying the thongs of the yoke, setting free the oppressed, breaking off every yoke, sharing your bread with the hungry, bringing the afflicted and the homeless into your house, Again, the homeless, the afflicted, those who are on, who don't have security, right? In basic security, right? And the idea of the fast, what God wants. We'll come back to the idea of morality and its relation to cultic service or cultic worship. Yeah. And, I just have to throw this in. The message, very basic and yet one we cannot forget. The prophets championed God's message for peace. Who would like to belt this one out?
I nominate
Yes.
Steve Hauser.
They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore.
Amen to that. Wow. Not there yet, are we? So we'll take a moment to look at the prophet Amos. Yeah? So just some background. Preached, as I mentioned, in the northern kingdom of Israel around 750 before the Common Era. He's described as a sheep breeder from Tekoa, which is about 10 miles north of Jerusalem, but was probably a wealthy wealthy owner of land or flocks, clearly educated and literate. Book of Amos contains literary and thematic features that are typical of many of the literary prophets, and that's why I'd like to just focus a little on Amos. Denunciation of social injustice. Who would like to read from Amos 4? Yes, please.
Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, on the hill of Samaria, who defraud the poor, who rob the needy, who say to your husbands, bring and let us carouse. My Lord Yahweh swears by his holiness, behold, days are coming upon you when you will be carried off in baskets, and to the last one in fish baskets, taken out of the city, each one through a breach straight ahead, and flung on the refuse heap.
Yeah. Now, thank you for that. Now that's really striking imagery, and this is against the wealthy women, right, of Bashan. Now the cows, bulls, and rams were, what do we call? Well, if we were to refer to someone today, we wouldn't call in a very positive way. You wouldn't call the person you're trying to court a cow or a bull or a ram, unless you really want to end it right then and there, right? So, but the Canaanite gods were referred to as cows and bulls and rams and also the wealthy. So this was a positive comment, but look at the imagery and the play. And by the way, the prophetic work is so striking because of the powerful rhetoric employed and the imagery, right? It's incredible. Metaphors. And look what will happen to them. These beautiful cows will end up as slabs of meat on the butcher's block, cast away, right? So it's a major criticism of these wealthy women, right? More from Amos. Abraham, how about reading from Amos?
Listen to this, you who devour the needy, annihilating the poor of the land, saying, if only the new moon were over, so that we could sell grain, the Sabbath, so that we could offer wheat for sale, using an ephah that is too small, and a shekel that is too big, tilting the dishonest scale, and selling grain refuse as grain. We will buy the poor for silver, the needy for a pair of sandals. Yahweh sears by the pride of Jacob. I will never forget any of their doings.
Thank you for that, and thank you for not embarrassing me that it's Yahweh swears. So
Yeah.
you read what you were supposed to, but I made a boo-boo. Yeah, this is pretty powerful, isn't it?
Yes.
Listen to this, you who devour the needy, annihilating the poor of the land and saying, if only the new moon were over, because the new moon meant it was a festival, it was a break, a holiday. You weren't able to make money, right? Commerce ceased during the new moon festival, so that we could sell grain. The Sabbath, so we could offer wheat for sale. Like, who wants Sunday? Stores are closed. Shoot, no, can't wait for Sunday to be over. Money, money, money on Monday, 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 right? That's what this is about, right? Using an ephah, which is a measurement that is too small, right? To cheat someone, and a shekel that is too big. Tilting the dishonest scale and selling grain refuse as grain, right? It's, don't hold this against me, but the first example I was trying to think of was, selling bad cocaine, right? Using powder or some sugar, whatever they do, right? That's what this is about, right? Or tilting the scales. I don't know, when I go to certain countries and you buy according to the scale, I never feel comfortable thinking that the scale is really, right? You just have to go with it. It is tilted. I mean, we have our own form of that, no doubt, but just that image of the tilted scale. Right. We will buy the poor for silver. What does buy the poor for silver mean, right? We have slavery here. The needy will buy the needy for a pair of sandals. Yahweh swears by the pride of Jacob, I will never forget any of their doings. You're not going to get away with this, right? That's what this says. You're not going to get away with it. Any questions about this particular passage or one that we had before? Any comments? We can come back to it. Okay. So morality, not cultic service, right? Morality is superior to cultic practices. God says, I don't need your sacrifices. I want chesed, your love. I want acts of loving kindness. I don't want cheap performances of sacrifice. Don't just come and worship and offer if your heart isn't called to justice, if you are tilting those scales, right? This is pretty important. So who would like to read? Yes, please.
I loathe, I spurn your festivals. I am not appeased by your solemn assemblies. If you offer me burnt offerings or your meal offerings, I will not accept them. I will pay no heed to your gifts of fatlings. Spare me the sound of your hymns, and let me not hear the music of your lutes. But let justice well up like water, righteousness like an unfailing stream.
Yeah, so thank you. What are the concerns here? We haven't read anything about murder or rape or physical violence, right? But because these are pretty obvious grievances, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious you shouldn't be murdering and raping and performing acts of violence. I mean, they're grievous violations of social and religious morality. But the crimes denounced as absolutely unacceptable to God are the crimes that are present in any era: taking bribes, lack of charity to the poor, denying laborers their wages, right? These are the crimes that the prophets highlight. It really is interesting when you think about it. We don't get, you'll see here and there, killing is bad, and right, the nation will have peace. But the recurring message is about how we behave toward the marginalized, toward one another, how we behave as business people, what we do with our wealth. It's actually interesting. It's not that having wealth is the problem. The problem is what we do with our wealth. How do we hoard it and just go for more, or are we sharing? How do we contribute to society? That's coming out. And again, with this one, well, I spurn your festivals. I am not appeased by your assemblies. If you offer me burnt offerings, I'm not going to accept them. Don't give me any of this. Give me justice, right? So, again, echoing much of what we've been discussing. Now, the other thing to note is that the nation is not punished on account of idolatry. If you recall in Deuteronomy, idolatry, or not even just Deuteronomy, throughout, idolatry is a big no-no. I mean, it's right up there, top the commandments. No other God but me. And at every turn, right? Even your great King Solomon is lusting after, following the hearts of his wives' gods, right? Having other gods, right? What's interesting is that in the prophetic literature, idolatry is mentioned for sure, but it isn't the prominent or the only behavior that will doom the nation, right? The nation is punished because of its moral failings, right? So as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, one of the issues that the prophets were wrestling with is how do you make sense of punishment, real exile, right? Real destruction. Well, they do by pointing to the moral failings of the society, of forgetting the covenants, but not just covenant in general. It not behaving in a loving way toward others. So doomed because of commonplace venial sins, right? False scales and bribes. That's what brings the destruction.
I'm always confused why they would actually condemn the burnt offerings, and yet centuries later, in Jesus' time, they're still having burnt offerings. Do they not listen to their prophets?
Yeah, well, no, that's a great question, right? So it's not that the offerings are bad, because over time, with the destruction of the temple, right, you can't really have these offerings, right? So what happens with the destruction of the temple? At that point, we can talk about a Judean Jewish community, right? Before that, it's the Israelites. Now they're back with the destruction of the second temple in 70 of the Common Era. Where do you sacrifice if you're not sacrificing at a temple? And what happens is that the rabbis over time develop a system where, in fact, it's prayers, and they draw on the prophets. It's prayers that are understood as the act of sacrifice. And it's the Seder meal, for example, that now becomes a meal that takes place in the home.
I can see why after the second temple, but at the time of Jesus, there was some kind of temple there, and
Yeah.
they were doing sacrificing and selling their pigeons and all that stuff. Didn't they read their prophets?
Yes, yes, but it wasn't don't sacrifice. It's true. Like we just read about the preference, right? But God never said don't sacrifice, because really that's how they connected, right? The system, right, was through the three offerings, daily offerings.
The sacrifice is meaningless without the justice.
Yeah,
The sacrifice is hollow.
yeah.
It's God wants, go ahead, sacrifice, but at the same time, let justice well up like water, which is such a gloriously beautiful image.
It is. Thank you. That's, yes, it's not, it's sacrifice and make the offerings, right? But with a good heart. Yeah. Remember, I mean, Mary and Joseph went to Jerusalem, right? And Jesus observed Passover. So it wasn't that was wrong. It was, I don't want that if I don't have
justice.
If I don't have justice. Now Terry is going to read. So when you said this, I think is just really. I don't know. It's fascinating, right? We see that in the New Testament, what's carried over is this sense of justice. I mean, if you didn't know this was from James, which is a letter in the New Testament, I could have said, oh, this is Amos, and I suspect you wouldn't know the difference, right? So Terry, will you please read for us?
Come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you. Your riches have rotted, and your clothes are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have rusted, and their rust will be evidence against you, and it will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasures for the last day. Listen, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughters.
So once again, it's not because you are rich, it's because you denied the laborers their fair wage.
Yeah. Look, there's a criticism of the, affluence. Yes, it's that irresponsibility, and it's also it's how one has accumulated. Is it on the backs of others? Is it by tilting those scales? Right? No, absolutely. And I actually think, I didn't give this much thought that it isn't about the wealthy until I was just putting this together. Yes, I knew that, but I thought, wait, this is really interesting. What I was thinking while assembling the material and noting that it isn't a critique of the wealthy is just how unfortunate, that it's unfortunate that message isn't reiterated, right? Because I think that there are certain social tensions in our in society that could be somewhat attenuated if we actually really noted what is being preached here. It's not that having is bad. It's what we do with what we have and how we need it. So, the prophetic message today is the prophetic message that has been with us for, oh gosh, how many years now, right? Which is compelling, isn't it? And back to maybe the you can't help but say why have things not changed, right? They haven't changed because human nature hasn't changed. Societies haven't changed, and I don't say that so that we walk away feeling bad that things haven't changed. It's just being realistic about the fact that the poor will, as Jesus said, the poor will always be right. Among you, among us, with us, right? But if there is change, then that changes for each of us individually to think about our own scales and wages. And I was thinking, my gosh, our gardener, well, what if I give another raise? Like, gosh, he should be thanking this community for his next small raise. But that's the power of reading this. Like actually, that's what we're called to do, right? So I want to leave time. I was told to leave time. I want to leave time for discussion. This is just a broad summary of some of the themes in the prophetic literature, and each book, each prophetic book is unique. Is talking about a specific text, a period, a region, and we have that span of several hundred years with different emphases. But this is more generally the gist of the biblical prophets. So, any questions, comments, please?
I have a question.
Please.
I don't mean this as a setup, but on a scale of 1 to 10,
Yes.
how new was Jesus' message in the time that he lived?
Wow, it's a great question. How new? Radically new and not so radically new. Radically new in that, okay, let me backtrack and say, Jesus, people say that Jesus founded Christianity. Christianity was founded on the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus, according to Matthew, did not come to abolish the law, right? Not the jot or tittle of the law would be abolished. I mean, Matthew, he was is depicted as within, very much so within a Jewish context, and so he was reforming, he was critiquing, he was prophetic in that sense. He was very much in that respect in line with the prophets here, right? In that respect, but and yes, critiquing the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So that you can argue if that's radical or not, but give to Caesar what is Caesar. So he's not a rabble rouser in that way. But his message to deepen the law, right, to extend it, was pretty radical. Who's your neighbor? Your neighbor isn't the person in your community. You're asked to go 1 mile. You don't go 1 mile, you go 3 miles. right? Radical in the sense of if your eye makes you wander, take your eye out. Better to rip your eye out than create a sin. Or your hand, cut it off than to steal. So that was pretty radical. Who are his best buds? I mean that's radical in that sense. But when I said and not so radical, the teachings were there, right? I mean he wasn't just plopped on earth. You know, Jesus and the depictions of Jesus come from the Greco-Roman Jewish milieu, right? In that setting. So it's a great question, but I do think it's different. It's significantly different. It's significantly different, and it's a message that is powerful when practiced. Yes, please.
Wonderful answer. And yes, other rabbis were also trying to get things straight in that community. It makes me wonder what the prophets of 750, etc., BCE, or Jesus would say today about the way that we do faithfulness and whether it is satisfying what God really wants from us. Jesus overturned the tables in the temple, and what would happen here?
Yes. I don't know what would happen in your community here. I hope, hey, nice job, you know, and feeling good and go to sleep.
We keep
But
a music program no matter what.
You mean
We
that
keep the
golden
music
path?
Did Solomon say we're supposed to do that?
but in other communities, forms of worship, probably wanting to turn those tables over.
Yeah, but it makes me wonder, this is so enlightening to me. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. Yes, sir, and then, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was very kind of interesting on a lot of levels. I do question whether or not our quick resolution by saying, oh, wealth is okay, it's how you use it, is actually in there. I didn't see that anywhere in there. So are we just giving ourselves a get out of jail free card and saying it's okay to have wealth but to do good? And the reason is I was looking at that last passage of James, that last sentence does not say anything like wealth is okay. It says pleasure and luxury are bad in the world of slaughter that you live in. That's puritanical to me. Now maybe there's a switch that's happening here. Maybe there's a massive amount of Hebrew in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament that praises wealth gathering, but I don't see it. I don't actually see it. It's like it makes us feel a little more comfortable when we read it. So it's not really saying it's that.
What is your name?
John.
John.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, you're really, I was thinking, it's an argument from silence, right? Because it doesn't say everyone needs to be poor and you have to share everything. So it's more of it's the absence. And if you think, by the way, Catholic teachings of social justice or the liberation theologians would disagree with me completely, right? They'd say, what are you talking about? Didn't Jesus say it's harder for a rich person? Yeah. Right, and there's a lot there. There are nuggets that we can pull out. So you're right, but on reflection, I don't know if what's the alternative? I'm being very practical
Yeah,
here,
no.
John, right? What's the alternative? So we do what?
No, I mean, we could say the rich you will always have with you, the same kind of.
Yes, John,
I don't have a strong view, it's just I'm a little sobered by what I actually read and
Yeah.
think about how how I rationalize the way I live.
It's
Yes,
how we
and-
get there.
And my there's that, and my argument, and if you didn't see it, it was more of an argument from silence, that it didn't say that. It actually said how you made your wealth and how wealthy people and people of power treat treat others. Someone always has power, right? And it's the abuse of the power. Or we can say all power corrupts, in which case we're all screwed because, we're not getting out of that dichotomy, power and powerless. No, thank you, really, thank you for that. I was looking to see what, it's okay, how to get to the James, what's said there. But no, that's great, thank you. Yes.
We saw last night at the Actors Gang a Dario Fo play. Dario Fo was a communist who won the Nobel Prize, by the way. And the Actors Gang has updated and translated this hysterically funny play, which is all about the things that are going on now. People losing their homes, developers taking over their homes, no money for food, wild inflation, and it is so funny, you find yourself practically falling down on the floor. And the last message is these people who they've lost everything at this point. They've even they're being kicked out of their apartment building because the developers are coming in to take it over. And they have nothing to eat unless they steal it from the supermarkets. And they're looking out the windows of their apartment and they're seeing at the last minute that the people themselves are rising up and taking over. And even the police are joining the people. And so the answer, it's exactly what you're talking about. The prophecies from the Old Testament are there in this very, very funny play at the Actors Gang. I recommend it. The answer is in ourselves. It's in how we react. How much are we going to take? Because the protagonist of the thing is a guy who believes in the law and the justice until it finally comes right down to his belly. And it is it's a masterpiece and so funny.
Where is it?
It's in Culver City, the Actors Gang. That's Tim Robbins. And
Yeah.
Dario Fo is the Italian playwright who's been translated and updated. And I wouldn't say it's a piece of communist literature, but heck, what's the matter with that,
Thank you. I'm going to have to go, thank you.
It's today, it's a prophecy today.
Yeah, no, that's really, thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, Elizabeth, and yes.
If you look all the way back in Exodus, there are present many commands for us to behave ethically. Don't put your thumb on the scales when you are weighing things. It's all over the place in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. The focus is on how do we act. Now, I bet when we had our church service today, we had a confession of sin. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the Old Testament and the New Testament. We do still have sin, and this is still a present problem. But the message is, don't quit. Just because we haven't solved it now, we still have a call to take care of the poor, to do the things that Amos and James and Jesus, because it's all in the Gospels also, to do that now just as much as it was when, at the time Amos is prophesied, the kingdom of Israel is at its most wealthy,
Exactly.
its biggest geographically. And yet, Amos knew there was something rotten in the state of Denmark, so to speak,
Yeah.
and he goes north to prophesy. And I bet we have
prophets now in our city, and we need to listen and act.
Yes, and that's actually what I want, where I want to go, but I want to take this
Well, that's
question.
sort of what I
Thank
was
you.
thinking, because of course, I think it was Amos that Martin Luther King quoted.
Yes.
And it was new to me when we were studying the prophets that they had communities of them. So then I started thinking, well, maybe all the protesters nowadays
That's
are the community prophets,
That's the play.
and Martin Luther King type are the leaders, the prophets.
That's exactly what this is
Because we don't have the prophets the way they did, but this may be our version.
That's right. Who are our 21st century prophets? And it is easy to pick Gandhi out and
Right.
Martin Luther
Right.
King Jr., but who counts as a prophet?
After the murder of Floyd, it was an uprising that was not necessarily led by one person. like
Yeah.
Martin
No,
Luther
and I
King.
love your response, because your response is it's not one voice. It's the movement. It's a movement, or there are various movements, right? That are calling us out, and they make us uncomfortable. They make me uncomfortable. I'd be lying if I said, "Oh yeah, great." I mean, yes, of course I get it, and I get it, and
But
yet
weren't
it
the
makes me
prophets making
uncomfortable.
people uncomfortable too?
I'm sorry?
Weren't the prophets
Exactly.
making people uncomfortable?
Yes, and we
That was
should,
their role.
exactly, and we should feel uncomfortable because we're complicit in some way and helpless. There are limits to what we can and can't do, and the frustration that comes with that. So absolutely, yes, please.
Maybe the children are our prophets, because they don't really have any power, so they just see, and they don't have a filter, and they just, like a few years ago, a lot of people in Southern California, a lot of elementary kids would go to SeaWorld, and then you started having elementary kids saying, we don't want to go. And so suddenly the adults were saying, well, why? And so.
No, that's interesting,
Very good.
absolutely. Yes, sir, please.
I think writers are today's prophets, many writers. And I'm reading 1619 right now, and it's very disturbing to read it, but it's important to learn about what's happening and what happened.
Could I just add something to
Please.
Steve's comment? I think you're absolutely right about that. The 1619 is triggering the most heinous laws in a lot of Midwest and Southern red states. A complete backlash, just like Black Lives Matter triggered a bigger pushback. 1619 is just doing devastating things to the teaching of history and reality in its packaged morally. So I was thinking as you were talking about the false prophets, my gosh, the blowback we see now to the moral outrage is just overwhelming to me and a little bit depressing. I can't wrap my head around that force of the pushback and the crushing of the kind of voice for morality. So I'm just think that connects us to the Old Testament too. I mean, there's also this other rise up, and think of the self-righteousness that exists on the right in white supremacist groups and victimized groups of one sort or another who claim they are. So it's, this really is resonant today, and not just because we've all figured out that we're going to follow this approach, but I think.
Yeah, and
Discouraging.
And the false, but I'm going to push a little, and just to make us also think about I love that, John, you brought in that the false prophet, because you remind us that the true prophet is the one who does make us uncomfortable and tells us how God is unsatisfied with our moral behavior. The extreme left is also possibly contributing to problems, and some can be depicted as false prophets. So my point in bringing this up is that it's easy for us to say them, the Republicans,
Right.
the right, the red, and there are
Sounds Christian. It's so far from
Well,
what the
yeah,
teachings of
yeah.
Christ were. That
Well, and I have to say that I was just, we at UCLA, we just had an event with Michael Schur, the producer of The Good Place, and wrote How to Be Perfect. I wish you, have to get you on our mailing list. It was really an excellent, excellent event. A lot of students came, and why am I telling you this? In my conversation with Mike throughout the day and over dinner, and I'm reading his book, it was very clear that his take is a humanistic approach, and in part I think he just has an allergic reaction to religion. But as I was reading his book, I thought, oh my gosh, this is what Jesus would say, or why don't we look at Augustine, and Christianity can address the moral, philosophical issues that he raises in his book, but he doesn't, and a lot of people don't look to Christianity because it is considered, it's cornered by, others, and the others we have negative negative associations with, and I think that's deeply unfortunate.
it's tragic.
It really is. It really is.
It makes you not want to send your grandchildren to Sunday school.
Oh,
I mean that.
yeah.
I mean, one doesn't want little kids indoctrinated in some weird, un-Jesus-like way.
Yeah, no,
And I don't mean this school.
No, I understand. Yes, please.
But I want to stress that when you read this, prophets are speaking to us individually. They're asking us, what are we doing? Are we following the rules? Not, is there some other group that we should blame?
That's right.
It's
That's
us.
right. It's us. Right. The focus is on us. Yeah, that's, so maybe we should end on the focus is on us. Thank you so much. I really loved working